The word uneducable landed in the classroom like a stone dropped into still water. It didn't echo loudly, but its ripples spread everywhere, touching every desk, every notebook, every quiet breath. Aaliyah sat in the third row by the window, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her fingernails pressed half-moons into her skin. She didn't look up when the word was spoken. She didn't need to. She already knew it was aimed at her. Sunlight spilled across the old linoleum floor of room 214, catching dust in the air and turning it into something almost beautiful. Outside, the late spring breeze moved the trees gently, but inside the room the air felt heavy, thick with judgment and impatience. Posters about potential and success hung crookedly on the walls, their messages hollow now. Mr. Hanley stood at the front of the class, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line of irritation. He was a man who liked order, liked quick answers, liked students who spoke confidently and looked like they belonged in college brochures. Aaliyah, quiet and soft-spoken, did not fit his picture of promise. "I've tried everything," he said, shaking his head as if he were the victim here. "Extra worksheets, after-school help, clear instructions." His eyes finally landed on Aaliyah. "But some students just don't have the capacity. We have to be realistic." A few students shifted uncomfortably. One girl glanced at Aaliyah with sympathy, then quickly looked away. A boy in the back snorted under his breath, earning a sharp look from Mr. Hanley, but no real reprimand. Aaliyah felt her throat tighten. She had stayed up late night after night, reading by the dim light of her phone so she wouldn't wake her little brother. She had rewritten essays 3 times, memorized formulas on the bus ride to school, and asked questions only to be met with sighs and dismissive answers. Still, she said nothing now. Experience had taught her that defending herself only made things worse. Mr. Hanley turned back to the whiteboard, already done with her. "Final exams are next week," he continued. "For some of you, they'll confirm what I already know." The bell rang, sharp and unforgiving. Chairs scraped against the floor as students rushed out, eager to escape the tension. Aaliyah moved slowly, slipping her notebook into her worn backpack. As she stood, she caught sight of her reflection in the window, a black girl with tired eyes and a face far too serious for 16. Mr. Hanley watched her from the front of the room. "Aaliyah," he called, his tone flat. She paused but didn't turn around. "Don't get your hopes up about the exam. Sometimes it's kinder to accept limitations." She nodded once, a small controlled movement, and walked out without a word. In the hallway, noise and laughter rushed around her, but it felt distant, like sound underwater. Each step echoed with the word he had used, the one that threatened to define her if she let it. Uneducable, but deep inside, beneath the doubt and the hurt, something else stirred, quiet, steady, and unyielding. Aaliyah didn't know how yet, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let that word be the last thing said about her. The word uneducable did not echo in the room. It settled there, heavy and humiliating, like dust that refused to clear. The classroom fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant noise of lockers slamming in the hallway outside. 24 students sat frozen in their seats, eyes shifting anywhere but toward the back row where Imani Brooks sat perfectly still. Ms. Carlyle stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line that suggested finality. She had said it casually, almost impatiently, as if she were stating a simple fact rather than condemning a 13-year-old girl's potential. "Some students," she added, her gaze flicking briefly toward Imani, "simply don't have the capacity for abstract thinking. We need to be realistic." Imani felt heat crawl up her neck, but she did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears only made things worse. Instead, she stared down at her desk, at the scratched initials of students who had come and gone, and focused on slowing her breathing. Around her, she could feel the reactions even without looking. Some classmates embarrassed on her behalf, some uncomfortable, and a few quietly satisfied. This wasn't the first time. Since transferring to Westbridge Academy, one of the most prestigious public schools in the district, Imani had been marked as a problem before she ever spoke. Her test scores from her old school hadn't transferred cleanly due to administrative errors. Her quiet nature was mistaken for disengagement, and her refusal to act small or grateful was interpreted as attitude. Ms. Carlyle had decided who Imani was within the first week. After class, chairs scraped against the floor as students rushed out, eager for lunch and distance from the tension. Imani moved slowly, packing her notebook with careful precision. She had learned that moving too fast invited comments. "Why are you always in a hurry?" And moving too slow invited others. "Are you lost again?" "Imani, stay back," Miss Carlyle said, her tone clipped. Imani nodded without looking up. When the room was empty, Ms. Carlyle sighed, the way adults did when they believed they were being patient. "You're clearly struggling," she said, "and I think it's time we talk about placing you in a more appropriate track." Imani finally looked up. Her eyes were steady, dark, and far older than 13. "I'm not struggling," she said quietly. "I understand the material." Ms. Carlyle gave a short laugh. "Your participation says otherwise, and your last quiz." "I got an 88, Imani interrupted, still calm. The class average was 82. The teacher paused, momentarily thrown off, then waved it away. "One decent score doesn't change the pattern. Some students just test well, but don't truly grasp concepts." Imani swallowed. "Then why don't you call on me?" That question landed harder than either of them expected. "Miss." Carlyle's expression hardened. "Because when I do, you freeze, and I won't disrupt the class waiting for you to find your words." Imani didn't argue. She had learned that defending herself only made adults dig in deeper. Instead, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper. "This is my final exam outline," she said, placing it gently on the desk. "I've already finished it." Ms. Carlyle glanced at it, clearly unimpressed. "You're not even scheduled to take the final yet." "I asked the counselor," Imani replied. "She said I could, if you approved." Silence stretched between them. Ms. Carlyle picked up the paper at last, scanning it quickly, then more slowly. Her brows furrowed despite herself. The outline wasn't just complete, it was insightful. Themes connected across chapters. References were accurate, nuanced, and original. Still, she set it down. "Ambitious," she said coolly, "but ambition doesn't equal ability." Imani nodded once. "Then let me prove it." For a long moment, Ms. Carlyle studied the girl in front of her, not as a student, but as a challenge. Finally, she spoke. "Fine. You'll take the final exam with the rest of the class, and when you fail, we revisit this conversation." Imani picked up her bag and headed for the door. Just before leaving, she turned back. "I won't fail," she said, not defiant, not angry, just certain. When the door closed behind her, Ms. Carlyle remained standing, staring at the empty space where the girl had been. Something uncomfortable stirred, something she pushed down immediately. She had seen students like Imani before, she told herself. Quiet, overconfident, eventually exposed. What she didn't realize was that the final exam wasn't just a test of knowledge, it was a reckoning. The room felt different the morning of the final exam. It wasn't louder or quieter in any obvious way, but something invisible had shifted, like the air before a storm. Desks were aligned in perfect rows, the blinds half open to let in pale winter light, and the clock above the whiteboard ticked louder than usual. Each second sounded deliberate, impatient. Aaliyah sat in her usual seat near the back, her hands folded on the desk, her exam booklet face down in front of her. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just questions, but months of judgment, whispers, and assumptions. She inhaled slowly. Across the room, Mrs. Caldwell stood near the board, flipping through her clipboard. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she walked, stopping briefly beside a few desks to remind students of the rules. When she reached Aaliyah, she paused. "Remember," Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice low but pointed, "this exam determines whether you move forward. Do your best." There was no encouragement in her tone, only warning. Aaliyah nodded without looking up. She had learned that meeting Mrs. Caldwell's eyes invited commentary, raised eyebrows, sighs, looks that said "see" before she even spoke. The bell rang. "Begin," Mrs. Caldwell announced. Pages flipped in unison, pens scratched. A few students sighed almost immediately, already overwhelmed. Aaliyah turned her booklet over. The first question didn't scare her. Neither did the second or the third. She moved steadily, methodically, reading each problem twice before answering. Her handwriting was careful, precise. She showed every step, every assumption, every justification, not because she needed to, but because she knew she would be questioned if she didn't. Halfway through the exam, she felt it, the familiar weight of someone watching her. Mrs. Caldwell stood near the back now, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Aaliyah's paper, not roaming, not checking other students, just standing there. Aaliyah kept writing. Her mind drifted briefly to the nights she had spent at the kitchen table, her mother asleep on the couch after a double shift, the TV murmuring softly, to the moments she had almost given up, staring at problems that didn't make sense until they did, to the library afternoons, the online lectures, the notebook filled edge to edge with corrections and notes. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. When she reached the final question, she allowed herself a quiet exhale. It was the hardest one, multi-step, conceptual, the kind that separated memorization from understanding. Aaliyah smiled faintly. She worked through it slowly, building the solution piece by piece. When she finished, she reviewed her entire exam once, then again. Only then did she raise her hand. Mrs. Caldwell looked surprised, then annoyed. She walked over, took the booklet without a word, and placed it on her desk at the front. Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from something close to relief. Around her, students continued writing, some chewing pens, others staring blankly at the ceiling. When the bell rang again, Mrs. Caldwell collected the remaining exams. Her expression was tight, unreadable. "Results will be posted tomorrow," she said. Class dismissed. Chairs scraped back. Students filed out, already discussing which questions they'd guessed on, which ones they'd skipped. Aaliyah walked out quietly. The next day, the hallway outside the classroom was crowded before the bell even rang. A sheet of paper was taped to the door. Final exam scores. Students pushed forward, scanning for their names. Barely passed. I knew I bombed it. Who got the highest? Then someone went silent. Aaliyah stepped closer. Next to her name was a number so high it looked unreal. At the very top of the list. A perfect score. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the whispers started. Not mocking this time, but confused, curious, uncertain. Behind the door, Mrs. Caldwell stood frozen, staring at the same list she had checked 3 times already. She hadn't expected this. Not from her. The bell rang, sharp and loud. And for the first time all year, when Aaliyah walked into the classroom, every head turned. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and old paper, the kind of smell that clung to schools built decades ago and never truly renovated. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, cutting the room into warm rectangles of light and shadow. Most students lounged in their seats with casual confidence, backpacks slung open, notebooks half-filled. For many of them, this room was familiar territory, a place where expectations were low and outcomes predictable. For Aaliyah, it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. She sat in the 3rd row, hands folded tightly on her desk, eyes fixed on the board. Her notebook was immaculate, Pages filled with neat handwriting, diagrams carefully drawn, margins full of small notes and questions she had worked out on her own late at night. No one ever commented on that. No one ever noticed. At the front of the room stood Mrs. Holloway, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line as she scanned the class. She was a woman who believed deeply in potential, but only when it matched her own expectations. She had already decided who would succeed and who would struggle, and she taught accordingly. "Aaliyah, Mrs. Holloway said suddenly, her voice sharp enough to cut through the low hum of whispered conversations. "Answer the question on the board." Aaliyah felt several heads turn toward her. Her stomach tightened, but she stood slowly, smoothing her sweater with trembling fingers. She read the problem, a complex analytical question that required not memorization, but reasoning. She had solved it the night before, twice, just to be sure. She began to explain, her voice quiet but steady. Halfway through her answer, Mrs. Holloway let out a short, dismissive laugh. "No, no," she interrupted, waving a hand as if brushing away something unpleasant. "That's not how someone at this level should be thinking." Aaliyah froze. "I've told you before," the teacher continued, not lowering her voice. "Some students simply aren't academically inclined. There's no shame in that. But this," she gestured vaguely toward Aaliyah's notebook, "this is too advanced for you. You're overcomplicating things you don't understand." A ripple of awkward silence moved through the room. A few students shifted uncomfortably. Others stared straight ahead, relieved the attention wasn't on them. Aaliyah swallowed hard. Her face burned, but she didn't sit down. I checked it against the textbook examples," she said softly. "And the reasoning matches." Mrs. Holloway cut her off again. "Enough. Sit down." Aaliyah obeyed, her legs feeling heavy, her chest tight. As she sat, she heard the word again, spoken under the teacher's breath but loud enough to land like a slap. "Uneducable." The rest of the lesson passed in a blur. Numbers and words filled the board, but Aaliyah barely saw them. That single word echoed in her mind, louder than the ticking clock, louder than the scraping of chairs. Uneducable. She had heard versions of it before, not college material, be realistic, set smaller goals, but never so plainly, never so publicly. When the bell rang, students rushed out, laughing and talking about weekend plans. Aaliyah stayed seated for a moment, gathering her things slowly, carefully, as if moving too fast might make everything spill over. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not shame, resolve. That evening, she didn't turn on the TV. She didn't check her phone. She spread her books across the small kitchen table at home under the flickering light and began to study with a quiet intensity that scared even her. If the world had decided she was uneducable, she would answer in the only language it seemed to respect, results, and she would make them impossible to ignore.